I, 34F, have always had a complicated relationship with my younger brother Jonathan, 29 Mem. Growing up in a middle-class family in suburban Ohio, our parents struggled to make ends meet. My dad worked long hours as a factory manager, while my mom juggled part-time jobs to supplement our income. Despite their best efforts, money was always tight. From an early age, I noticed a stark difference in how our parents treated Jonathan and me. He was the baby of the family, born when I was already in elementary school. Our parents doted on him, often sacrificing their own needs to give him the best of everything. I, on the other hand, was expected to be more independent and self-reliant. This dynamic became even more pronounced as we entered our teenage years. I excelled in school, particularly in math and science. I joined the robotics club and spent hours tinkering with computers in our garage. My parents were proud of my achievements, but they rarely had the time or resources to support my interests fully. Jonathan, meanwhile, struggled academically, but shone in sports. He joined the high school football team and quickly became a local star. Our parents never missed a game, cheering him on from the sidelines. They scraped together money for private coaching and top-of-the-line equipment, determined to nurture his athletic talent. When it came time for college, the disparity in our treatment reached its peak. I had my heart set on attending a prestigious tech school out of state. Despite my excellent grades and test scores, our parents sat me down and explained they couldn't afford the tuition. They encouraged me to attend the local state university instead, where I could live at home and save money. Jonathan, however, received a different message. Though his grades were mediocre, our parents were determined to send him to a good school with a strong football program. They took out a second mortgage on our house to cover his tuition and living expenses at a private university several states away. I was devastated, but determined to make the best of my situation. I threw myself into my studies at the state school, working part-time jobs to cover my expenses and taking out student loans to fill the gaps. It was a challenging few years, but I graduated with honors and landed a job at a promising tech startup. Over the next decade, I worked tirelessly to build my career. I put in long hours, constantly upskilled, and took calculated risks that paid off. By my early 30s, I had climbed the ranks to become a senior software engineer at a major tech company, earning a comfortable six-figure salary. Jonathan's path after college was less straightforward. His dreams of playing professional football never materialized, and he seemed lost without that goal. He bounced between various jobs: bartender, personal trainer, car salesman, never sticking with anything for long. Our parents continued to support him financially, paying his rent and bailing him out of credit card debt more than once. Despite the tensions from our childhood, I tried to maintain a relationship with Jonathan. We'd meet up for dinner when I visited our hometown, and I made efforts to stay involved in his life. But there was always an undercurrent of resentment on both sides. He envied my success, while I couldn't forget the preferential treatment he'd received. About 2 years ago, Jonathan met his now-fiancée, Amy, 27F, at a local bar where he was working. Amy came from a wealthy family and had a job in marketing. They hit it off immediately, bonding over their shared love of partying and living in the moment. After dating for only 6 months, Jonathan proposed with a ring he'd bought on credit. When Jonathan announced their engagement, our parents were over the moon. They immediately offered to contribute $10,000 towards the wedding, despite being on a fixed income in retirement. Jonathan and Amy began planning an extravagant celebration, talking about destination venues and designer dresses as if money was no object. I tried to stay out of the wedding planning, focusing on my own life and career. But a few weeks ago, Jonathan called me out of the blue. He sounded excited and a bit sheepish as he explained that their wedding budget had ballooned to over $50,000. They wanted a lavish affair at a historic mansion, with gourmet catering and a live band. Jonathan asked if I could chip in $15,000 to help cover costs, assuring me he'd pay me back someday. I was stunned by the request. While I could technically afford it, $15,000 was a significant amount of money, more than I'd spent on my entire wardrobe over the past 5 years. I told Jonathan I'd need time to think about it, which seemed to disappoint him. Last weekend, our family got together for dinner at our parents' house. It was supposed to be a casual catch-up, but Jonathan quickly steered the conversation towards the wedding. He started pressuring me about contributing, talking about how amazing the venue was and how much it would mean to have my support. I tried to deflect, saying I wasn't comfortable committing to such a large amount. I suggested they consider scaling back their plans to fit their budget. This seemed to touch a nerve with Jonathan. He got angry and sneered. "Come on. We all know you make bank as some fancy programmer. Stop being so stingy and selfish. It's not like you have a family to support or anything." His words stung, bringing up old insecurities about my personal life. I'd had a few relationships over the years, but nothing had stuck. I'd always prioritized my career, and while I was proud of my accomplishments, I sometimes wondered if I'd missed out on other aspects of life. Pushing those thoughts aside, I calmly said, "Jonathan, I worked very hard to get where I am in my career. My money isn't just there for you to take. I have my own financial goals and responsibilities." He scoffed and said, "Oh, please, you just sit at a computer all day. It's not like you do anything important or meaningful. Some of us actually want to have families and lives outside of work." His dismissal of my career, which I'd poured my heart and soul into, was the last straw. I told Jonathan firmly that I wouldn't be contributing anything to his wedding after the way he spoke to me. Jonathan exploded in anger, calling me a selfish bitch and other choice names. Our parents tried to intervene, with Mom pleading for us to calm down and Dad raising his voice to be heard over the argument. But I'd had enough. I grabbed my purse and left the dinner early, ignoring their calls for me to come back. Since then, my phone has been blowing up with messages from Jonathan and our parents. They're saying I'm being petty and cruel for withholding money over a little argument. Jonathan has even threatened to uninvite me from the wedding if I don't pay up, while our parents are urging me to be the bigger person and let it go for the sake of family harmony. I feel torn and conflicted. On one hand, I don't want to reward Jonathan's entitled behavior or let him belittle my career and life choices. The way he spoke to me brought up a lot of old hurt from our childhood, reminding me of all the times I'd been expected to sacrifice for his benefit. On the other hand, I worry that I'm being too harsh and potentially damaging our relationship beyond repair. Despite our issues, he's still my brother, and I don't want to be the reason his wedding dreams are ruined. Plus, I know that refusing to contribute will likely cause a rift with our parents as well, who have always expected me to look out for Jonathan. I'm stuck between standing my ground and keeping the peace. Part of me wants to just write the check to make this all go away, but another part feels that would be letting Jonathan walk all over me once again. I could use some outside perspective on whether I'm justified in refusing to contribute, or if I'm being an asshole for letting an argument affect such an important event. Am I the asshole for refusing to contribute to the wedding? Should I just suck it up and pay to keep the peace? I'm really struggling with this decision and could use some advice. Update 1. It's been about 2 weeks since my last post, and unfortunately, the situation with my family has only deteriorated further. I wanted to provide an update on everything that's happened and get some more advice on how to proceed. After my initial refusal to contribute to Jonathan's wedding, he and our parents ramped up their pressure campaign. I received daily calls and texts guilt-tripping me about ruining the wedding and tearing the family apart. They brought up every possible argument, from reminding me of times Jonathan had helped me in the past, most of which I struggled to recall, to suggesting I was jealous of his happiness. The constant barrage was wearing me down, but I tried to stand firm in my decision. I knew that if I gave in now, it would set a precedent for Jonathan to come to me for money whenever he wanted in the future. Plus, his insulting words about my career still stung, and I felt he owed me an apology before I could even consider helping him. Things escalated when my mom showed up at my apartment unannounced one evening. I had just gotten home from a long day at work and was looking forward to a quiet night in. Instead, I opened the door to find her teary-eyed and pleading. She talked about how she and Dad had always dreamed of seeing both their children happily married, and how much it would mean to them to have a beautiful wedding for Jonathan. She reminded me of all the sacrifices they had made for us growing up, conveniently glossing over the unequal treatment, and how it was our duty as children to bring them joy in their old age. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, and I felt my resolve wavering. But then she said something that snapped me back to reality. She mentioned that they were considering taking out a loan against their house to cover the wedding costs if I wouldn't help. The idea of my retired parents going into debt for Jonathan's extravagant wedding plans was the wake-up call I needed. I steeled myself and told my mom that while I understood their desire to give Jonathan a nice wedding, I couldn't be responsible for funding it. I reiterated that $15,000 was a lot of money, and that I had my own financial goals and responsibilities. I also expressed concern about them taking on debt at their age, and gently suggested that perhaps Jonathan and Amy should consider a more modest celebration within their means. My mom didn't take this well. She accused me of being cold-hearted and said she didn't recognize the daughter she had raised. She left my apartment in tears, and I spent the rest of the night feeling guilty and conflicted. The next day, I decided to extend an olive branch. I called Jonathan and offered a compromise. I said that while I couldn't contribute the full $15,000, I would still like to be involved in his big day. I offered to help with some DIY decorations or other non-financial contributions. I thought this was a reasonable way to show my support without compromising my financial boundaries. Jonathan's response shocked me. He coldly informed me that if I wasn't going to pay the full amount, I wasn't welcome at the wedding at all. He claimed my presence would cast a dark cloud over their special day, and that he didn't want to look back on his wedding photos and be reminded of my selfishness. I was stunned into silence. The idea of being excluded from my own brother's wedding over money was heartbreaking. But it also reinforced my belief that Jonathan only saw me as an ATM, not his family he actually wanted to celebrate with. When I relayed this conversation to our parents, hoping they would see how unreasonable Jonathan was being, they surprisingly took his side. They said I should respect the couple's wishes, and that if I really cared about family, I would find a way to contribute the money to make things right. I felt like I was living in an alternate reality where my feelings and boundaries meant nothing in the face of Jonathan's desires. The whole situation was bringing up painful memories from our childhood, reminding me of all the times I'd been expected to sacrifice my own needs or wants for Jonathan's benefit. Things came to a head last weekend at a family gathering. It was my cousin's birthday party, and I decided to attend, hoping that being in a larger family setting might diffuse some of the tension. Jonathan and Amy were there, along with our parents and various aunts, uncles, and cousins. As soon as I arrived, I could feel the frosty atmosphere. Jonathan and Amy were huddled with our parents, shooting glares in my direction. I tried to focus on catching up with other relatives, but the tension was palpable. About an hour into the party, Jonathan confronted me. He accused me of crashing the event when I wasn't part of the family anymore. I tried to speak to him calmly, reminding him that I had as much right to be at a family gathering as he did. But he just got more worked up, his face turning red as he raised his voice. Amy joined in, calling me selfish and accusing me of trying to ruin their wedding out of jealousy. She made snide comments about how I was probably going to die, alone with my computers for company. Our parents stood by, not intervening as Jonathan and Amy verbally attacked me in front of the entire family. The argument escalated until Jonathan shoved me hard, causing me to stumble backward into a table. Our uncle had to physically restrain Jonathan to prevent things from getting worse. I left immediately after that, shaken by how violent the situation had become and hurt that no one, not even our parents, had stepped in to defend me. Since then, I've received a flood of messages from family members. Some, like my cousin whose party it was, are supportive of me. They're appalled at Jonathan's behavior and have reached out to check if I'm okay. But many are still taking his side, saying I provoked him by showing up uninvited, and that I should have known better than to attend a family event after refusing to contribute to the wedding. Most hurtful of all was a call from my parents. Instead of asking if I was all right after being physically assaulted by my brother, they berated me for embarrassing Jonathan in front of Amy's family, some of whom had also been at the gathering. They demanded that I apologize to Jonathan and Amy and agree to contribute to the wedding to make amends. I'm at a total loss for how to handle this situation now. The brother I grew up with seems like a stranger to me, capable of physical violence over a financial disagreement. My parents, who I always thought would have my back no matter what, seem to care more about keeping Jonathan happy than about my well-being. I'm heartbroken at how money has destroyed our family relationships. But despite all this, I also feel I can't back down now without completely losing my self-respect. Giving in to their demands after how I've been treated feels like it would be validating their behavior and opening the door for more emotional and financial exploitation in the future. I've decided to take a step back from all family events for the foreseeable future. I'm focusing on my work and spending time with supportive friends instead. It hurts to feel so isolated from my family, but I think it's necessary for my mental health right now. I'm still processing everything that's happened and trying to figure out how to move forward. Part of me wants to try one last time to reason with Jonathan and my parents, but another part feels like it might be healthier to accept that we may never have the kind of relationship I hoped for. Thank you to everyone who offered advice on my original post. I appreciate the support and outside perspectives as I navigate this difficult situation. If anyone has experience with similar family rifts or advice on how to proceed, I'd be grateful to hear it. Update 2. It's been about a month since my last update, and I wanted to share some unexpected developments in the ongoing saga with my brother and family. The biggest news is that Jonathan and Amy's wedding has been called off. I found out through a terse group text from my mother, simply stating that, due to unforeseen circumstances, Jacob and Amy have decided to postpone their nuptials indefinitely. Curious about what had happened, I reached out to my cousin Sarah, who tends to be in the loop on family gossip. She filled me in on the details she'd heard through the grapevine. Apparently, Jonathan and Amy had a huge fight over the wedding budget and guest list. From what Sarah heard, Amy wanted to invite a bunch of her college sorority sisters and their partners, most of whom Jonathan had never met. This would have added significantly to the already bloated guest list and catering costs. When Jonathan protested about the extra expense, Amy accused him of caring more about money than her happiness. She brought up my refusal to contribute, saying that if Jonathan had a better relationship with his family, they wouldn't be having these problems. This led to a bitter argument where a lot of underlying issues in their relationship came to light. Amy complained that Jonathan wasn't ambitious enough, and that she was tired of him relying on her income and her parents' connections to maintain their lifestyle. Jonathan accused Amy of being materialistic and said he felt pressured to live beyond his means to keep her happy. The argument spiraled from there, with both of them saying hurtful things they couldn't take back. By the end of it, Amy had thrown her engagement ring at Jonathan and stormed out of their apartment. While part of me felt a sense of vindication that their over-the-top wedding plans had fallen apart, I also felt bad for Jonathan. Despite our issues, I knew how much he had been looking forward to the wedding and starting this new chapter of his life. I imagined he must be devastated. After mulling it over for a few days, I decided to reach out to Jonathan. I sent a simple text saying I had heard about the broken engagement and that I was sorry things hadn't worked out. I told him that if he needed someone to talk to, I was here. To my surprise, Jonathan actually responded positively. He thanked me for checking in and acknowledged that things had gotten out of hand with the wedding planning. He admitted that the stress of trying to put together such an expensive event had taken a toll on his relationship with Amy. We exchanged a few more messages, and Jonathan suggested we meet up for coffee to talk things through in person. I was hesitant at first, given how our last encounter had ended, but I agreed. We decided to meet at a neutral location, a small cafe halfway between our apartments. I was nervous going into the meeting, unsure of what to expect. But it actually went better than I could have imagined. Jonathan arrived looking tired and subdued, a far cry from the angry, entitled person I'd dealt with at the family gathering. He started by apologizing for his behavior at the party, especially for shoving me. He said he'd been consumed by stress and frustration, but he knew that was no excuse for physical violence. Jonathan admitted that he'd been doing a lot of soul-searching since his breakup with Amy, and realized he had a lot of issues to work on. We had a long, honest conversation about our childhood and the resentments that had built up over the years. Jonathan confessed that he'd always felt inadequate compared to me, which fueled a lot of his anger and entitlement around money. He said he regretted dismissing my career and explained that it came from a place of insecurity about his own lack of direction. I opened up too, sharing how hurt I'd been by the preferential treatment he received growing up and how it had affected our relationship as adults. We both shed some tears as we worked through years of pent-up emotions. By the end of our talk, it felt like we'd made real progress in understanding each other. Jonathan asked if we could work on rebuilding our relationship, taking things slowly and communicating more openly. I agreed, feeling cautiously optimistic about the future of our sibling bond. However, things are still strained with our parents. When I told them about meeting up with Jonathan, they seemed more concerned about whether the wedding was back on than about us repairing our relationship. They're upset that I allowed the wedding to be called off by not contributing money. They seem to think that if I had just paid up, everything would have worked out fine. I've tried explaining that the issues between Jonathan and Amy went far beyond just finances, but they don't want to hear it. They're still pushing for me to offer Jonathan money, suggesting that maybe he could win Amy back if he could promise her the lavish wedding she wanted. I've had to set firm boundaries, making it clear that I won't be discussed in these financial terms. It's frustrating to deal with their fixation on money and status, but I'm trying not to let it derail the progress Jonathan and I have made. We've agreed to meet up regularly and are taking small steps to rebuild trust. I'm also working on maintaining healthier boundaries with our parents. I've started limiting my conversations with them, steering clear of topics related to money or the canceled wedding. It's not easy, and there are times I feel guilty for pulling back, but I know it's necessary for my own well-being. Throughout this whole ordeal, I've been incredibly grateful for the support of my friends and some understanding family members like my cousin Sarah. They've provided a sounding board and reality check when I've doubted myself. I'm cautiously optimistic about the future of my relationship with Jonathan, but I know we have a long way to go. As for my parents, I'm less certain. Their attitudes towards money and family obligations seem deeply ingrained, and I'm not sure if that will ever fully change. For now, I'm taking things one day at a time, focusing on my own mental health and the relationships that bring positivity to my life. Thank you again to everyone who has followed along with this story and offered support and advice. It's been a challenging few months, but I feel like I'm finally starting to see a way forward. Update 3. It's been about 2 months since my last update, and I wanted to share some final thoughts on how things have progressed with my family situation. Jonathan and I have continued to work on rebuilding our relationship. We've been meeting up for coffee or lunch every couple of weeks to talk. It's been challenging at times, but also rewarding to finally address years of built-up resentment and misunderstandings. During one of our recent meetings, Jonathan opened up about his struggles since the breakup with Amy. He admitted that he'd fallen into a depression and had started drinking heavily to cope. This revelation worried me, and I gently encouraged him to consider talking to a therapist. To my surprise, he was receptive to the idea and asked for help finding someone. We've also been talking more about our careers and future goals. Jonathan confessed that he's felt lost since his football dreams didn't pan out, and he's never really known what he wanted to do with his life. I've been trying to be supportive without being pushy, sharing some of my own experiences of figuring out my career path. One positive development is that Jonathan has started showing genuine interest in my work. He asked me to explain what I actually do as a software engineer, admitting that he'd never really understood it before. I walked him through some basics of coding, and he seemed fascinated. He even asked if I could teach him more, saying he's considering exploring tech as a potential career path. I've been cautious about getting too involved, not wanting to create new avenues for financial dependence, but I've been helping Jonathan polish his resume and practice for job interviews. He's applied for a few entry-level positions in tech companies, and while he hasn't had any offers yet, he seems more motivated than I've seen him in years. Things with our parents are still complicated. They're glad Jonathan and I are getting along better, but they still make occasional comments about how everything would have been fine if I had just paid for the wedding. I'm working on setting firmer boundaries with them, making it clear that I won't discuss financial matters related to Jonathan or the canceled wedding. There was a tense moment at a recent family dinner when my mom brought up the possibility of Jonathan and Amy reconciling. She suggested that if I contributed the money I had promised, which I never did, maybe they could rekindle their relationship. I shut down that line of conversation immediately, reminding them that Jonathan and Amy's relationship issues went far beyond wedding finances. I've also been reflecting a lot on my own attitudes towards money and success. While I stand by my decision not to fund Jonathan's wedding, I realize I could have communicated my feelings more clearly from the start. I'm trying to be more open about my finances with my family to avoid misunderstandings, while still maintaining healthy boundaries. One unexpected outcome of this whole situation is that it's brought me closer to some of my extended family members. My cousin Sarah, in particular, has become a great source of support. We've started having regular video chats, and it's nice to have a family member I can talk to openly without feeling judged. As for my own personal life, I've been making efforts to find more balance between work and socializing. I joined a local tech meetup group and have been enjoying connecting with like-minded professionals outside of work. I've even been on a few casual dates, though nothing serious has developed yet. Overall, I feel cautiously optimistic about the future of my family relationships. There's still work to be done, especially with my parents, but we're moving in a positive direction. I'm proud of the progress Jonathan and I have made, and I hope we can continue to strengthen our bond as siblings. Thank you to everyone who has followed this story and offered support and advice along the way. It's been incredibly helpful to have outside perspectives as I navigated this challenging situation. While things aren't perfect, I feel like I've grown a lot through this experience and am better equipped to handle family dynamics going forward.